He's the most entertaining, blindingly brilliant pundit of all time, according to the Guardian newspaper. His name is EAMON DUNPHY. I wonder what he thinks of that description. But there is no disputing the fact that for decades this man has been one of the most prominent and controversial voices in Irish life. He began his career at Manchester United and he played for the Irish national team on 23 occasions. He has worked as a print journalist for numerous newspapers, most notably at the Sunday Independent. He has been on radio at Today FM, News Talk and RTE, and has done work on television for TV3 and of course RTE as part of the dream team made up of himself, John Giles, Liam Brady, who were kept in check by the late Bill O'Hurley. EAMON hasn't stopped there, of course. He now has a podcast called The Stand with EAMON DUNPHY, and last I heard, he's topping the podcast charts in Ireland. Not bad for a man of 74 years of age. He is a loud critic of the Irish establishment, whatever that means, but one of the regular contributors to his podcast is the former Irish Taoiseach, Bertie Ahern. EAMON is a man full of what some would see as contradictions, but I see him as a man of convictions and a man who isn't afraid to change his mind. So EAMON DUNPHY, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, it's a pleasure, and you've done your research very well. I've had worse introductions than that.
I know it's a bit long there,
no,
but I think you're worth it, EAMON.
It's good, and thank you very much.
I'll cut straight to the chase. I'm sure you've talked about this already, but I want to ask you, why did you leave RTE?
Well, I left RTE because I felt that we had something that we had, which you referred to in your introduction, with John and Liam and Bill, was no longer really desired by RTE, or you know, they wanted to change. They wanted to reconfigure the panel, let's put it that way. And I didn't want to be part of sort of what I consider to be downgrading of it.
You felt downgraded? Or you felt the thing was downgraded?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, there's a very simple 3 boxes you have to tick if you're an analyst. First of all, you have to have a knowledge of the game, which people who've been professionals have. Secondly, you have to be able to express yourself. It's absolutely vital that you can express what you feel, what you see. You can articulate that. That's a must. And Liam and John and I ticked all those boxes. And as an outstanding broadcaster, Bill O'Hurley as anchor was, you know, a superb professional, like your own father is, in fact. I mean, there are people of rare distinction in public service broadcasting, particularly of that generation.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to be part of the dumbing down process, because now people were coming on the panel who didn't tick those boxes. The other box, the third box you need to tick, is a willingness to express candidly your view. So if Ireland are playing rubbish football and the whole nation is urging them on, and you can see what's happening isn't right, isn't tactically astute, if the wrong players are being picked, or players like Wes Hoolan are being left out, you've got to be prepared to confront the popular opinion and say, I'm sorry, you've got to challenge what the perception, the received wisdom of any given day or night. And those are 3 boxes: knowledge, the ability to express yourself, and the courage of professionalism to say, I don't care what the mob is saying.
Yeah.
This is actually not true, and I know enough to challenge it. So they're the boxes you had to tick. And as a result of doing that, I went in there 40 years ago with that, bearing in mind how poor the English coverage was, and yet RTE didn't have one viewer. Everyone watched soccer. It's hard for you to imagine now, someone of your generation, but everyone watched soccer on ITV and BBC, and later Sky. But we turned that around. Everyone watched the soccer when they had a choice on RTE, because we basically complied with those 3 imperatives, really.
And I think the country appreciated that and realised that, and that's where
Well,
you're
it was
born.
good television, I think.
Yeah.
Even women and people who weren't necessarily interested in sport were interested in the dynamic between all of us, because we didn't always agree.
No.
We had our differences, and Bill O'Hurley, he was a particularly brilliant journalist. Every game has a story. Every game. If it's Darlington versus Hartlepool, there's a story there.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill knew, and I was a journalist too, we knew where the story was in every match. If it was Real Madrid, Barcelona, or if it was Manchester United, Liverpool, there's a story on any given day.
Yeah.
So your job is to get at the story of that day, to discuss it intelligently and candidly. It's not rocket science at all. It's quite simple. Now, RTE began a process of dismantling that.
Is it true that you were told to go easy on Martin O'Neill?
Yes.
What was that conversation like?
It was brief.
Were you intimidated, or I don't think anyone would intimidate you, or what
I
was
wasn't intimidated. I was annoyed.
shocked?
I was annoyed. Not shocked. No, I was annoyed that just before European Championship, there appeared to be an attempt to obstruct us from doing our job by going easy on Martin O'Neill, the manager. Now, that's not what the licence payer pays money for. The trouble is, you see, being what they call a pundit. A pundit is a disparaging word. A pundit is someone who's mouthing off about anything in the world, and they don't know what they're talking about generally. So it's a disparaging description of what we did.
Yes.
But asking me to go easy as a journalist on Martin O'Neill was asking me to lay aside my professionalism and my obligation to the viewer, and RTE's obligation to the viewer, to tell it as it is. So that was
Or as you see it.
as you see it.
Yes.
That's right. That's a better way of putting it. So it's a kind of
Why is this
that's
happening?
wrong.
Why is this happening?
Well, there can be all kinds of reasons. The view is now, I think, in RTE, and not only in RTE, but particularly in RTE, that the public wants positivity, whatever this thing is.
Whatever that is, yeah.
Yeah, and that therefore they don't want the mood of the nation disturbed. And RTE doesn't want to be seen as giving a platform to rabble-rousers, which is what I became known as, really, me particularly. So they wanted to calm all that down, didn't want to upset anyone, and they'd have to deal with the FAI on rights for the games and the championships and all of that.
Okay.
So that's a factor in the equation. John Delaney was a factor in the equation too, as they didn't hesitate to tell me.
Wow.
And he was putting pressure on. He didn't want his manager and Roy Keane criticised, or anyone else criticised for that matter. So it was quite insidious, and it wasn't always explicit.
Okay.
But, you know, go easy on Martin with a smile is an invitation not to do your job in a professional way. So that was a red flag for me. And I actually decided to leave then, but was persuaded not to. And I signed on for 2 years. But then things changed in there, new head of sport, new, whatever the name, the head of content, and they decided, I think, that they would be better off getting rid of me. So
You're too much hassle.
yeah, and I was happy to be got rid of.
We spoke yesterday about Joe Brolly. He had something similar going on, I think. I don't know exactly the details. But anyway, you called him a rebel on the phone, and many would see you as something as something of a rebel.
Well,
and I think you would probably just see yourself as an independent mind.
Yeah, that would be, yeah, rebel is just, I mean, rebel is also a pejorative word in many ways. Rebel without a cause.
Yes. So what is your cause? What are you rebelling against? Or,
well, I'm not
is
rebelling.
anything...
I mean, my cause is good journalism is something that serves the public interest. It's sometimes contrarian, which is what I am. In other words, there's the conventional wisdom or received wisdom that everyone believes in that is wrong. So you've got to be prepared to say, look, hold on a minute here, this isn't true. This is propaganda, this is the fact, these are the facts. So I would say Joe Brolly is a colourful and knowledgeable pundit. He goes to places I wouldn't dream of going. I mean, he once said that Cavan football was as ugly as Morrissey. Now, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think personal abuse, even for Marty Morrissey, is on. That's not what I'm about at all. I'd be much more concerned, to be critical of someone because of their
character, maybe.
Well, no, not because of their inability to play.
Oh, sorry.
Or manage.
Yeah.
But I think Marty was being, put down in a way that I certainly wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean Joe's not a good and colourful pundit. He is.
You've mentioned the word rabble-rouser. There's a number of controversial people. I don't like that word, controversial. No, but anyway, let's use it. A few names I have here: Owen Harris, Conor Cruise O'Brien, John Waters, George Hook, and Kevin Myers.
Yeah.
Yourself. All people who are willing to rock the boat, in Irish opinion. Yeah. I'm wondering, where's the line drawn?
I don't
between
have very much in common with any of them, because Owen Harris is a polemicist, and he writes polemics. He has an agenda. He'd be the least offensive to me, but Hook is a bigot against women, and in other ways too. I wouldn't like to be associated with him. Waters, there's evidence up there in the sky of 12.5 minutes. You didn't hear it?
I did hear it.
Yeah, okay.
The Eighth Amendment.
Yeah, I was someone who believed in his right to his view, but as you know, I wouldn't like to be associated with Kevin Myers either, because although he was associated with stuff about race, about women, I would not want to be associated with any of that stuff. So that list you read out, unfortunately it pains me, but to be on that list, because I don't believe I've ever said a racist word in my life, or a bigoted word in my life. I've always been very clear about distinguishing between someone's character and their ability to play football. For example, I'd be very critical of Roy Keane as a manager, but I've always gone out of my way to say he's got 5 lovely children. He's a fine man in many respects. He looked after his parents in Cork. His father died just recently. Roy Keane is in many ways a fine man, but when he's in authority in a football situation, he's not. So it's important to make those distinctions.
Absolutely, and that's where I was going. Where is that line drawn between just being a polemicist, as you say?
Yeah.
But you did
it should
upset
be about
many
the
people.
Ideas.
You upset many people over the years, so that's why maybe you're in a different group. Well, with regard to the troubles and various things, many people would have had.
Well,
trouble
I don't know
with
whether I upset people or not. I mean, the thing is, if you're having a disagreement about ideas, it's different from questioning someone's character. You can disagree with someone's ideas and still regard them as being of good character and being completely sincere. So I've always been able to make that distinction.
Fine.
There are very, very few people that I have criticised for their if any, for their private behaviour. For example, I was highly critical of Mary Robinson, John Hume, the IRA leaders, because of what they were doing, or what views they were espousing, or I thought they might be insincere, in the case of Mary Robinson. But I've never said they were bad human beings. I never attacked their character as such. It's their public persona. There's 2 elements to every public figure. There's their public persona. That's the act they take out, and we all do it, including me. And then there's their private disposition. You can't get the 2 confused.
Yes.
So it's important to say this piece is about this person's ideas and behaviour as a public figure, rather than this person may look all right in public, but in private they're awful.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that.
Fair enough. Well, I appreciate
Unless
that.
you can prove you probably have stuff there
No.
differently.
There's no dirt to be dished here, but well, I like that distinction that you made. I want to ask you about discourse in Ireland, because News Talk provides on the radio probably the most serious alternative to RTE on radio. Maybe TV3 or what the new iteration of that is it
Virgin Media, yeah.
Provided on television or tried to provide it. Is that a good enough alternative?
No, frankly. I mean, it's owned by Dennis O'Brien. He's notorious for interfering in editorial matters, to banning people, as he did recently, from going on the radio.
Irish Times people.
Irish Times people. I've been banned from News Talk.
Have you?
Yes, for the last umpteen years since I worked for him, because I called him out on the radio program. So he bans people, and banning journalists and broadcasters and people expressing opinions is not a very good idea in a free society.
So is RTE a better alternative to Dennis O'Brien?
It sure is, yeah.
But you have problems with the way RTE does business, I think.
I don't know, I mean...
Like, I'm not talking about your personal stuff, but current affairs and
I think,
Irish affairs.
Well, RTE is a vast institution.
It is.
It's a very important institution in this country, because it's a primary source of news and entertainment and current affairs. So it's very important. It will, like any such organisation, it employs almost 2,000 people and disseminates stuff 24 hours a day. It will occasionally be subject to criticism. I wouldn't say I've been a particularly strident critic of RTE.
Fair enough.
I've worked there long enough. I left a few times, a couple of times, but I went back. RTE is subject to criticism, there's no doubt about
like
that.
Anyone else.
Well, the BBC is probably the greatest public broadcaster we've ever had in the world. But the BBC is frequently criticised. Every organisation of that scale, independent newspapers for example, would be subject to criticism. And they should be big enough to take criticism.
Yeah.
When it's coming from creditable sources.
Fair enough.
And that's again, it's always important to make distinctions. If someone Owen Harris is a good example. He's launched a 35-year crusade against RTE, who he alleges are keeping him off programmes and doing all kinds of horrible things to him. I don't think they are keeping him off programmes, but maybe they are. The point is, he has an agenda over and above the news agenda, and it's about how he's been treated by RTE. Now he's entitled to that.
I see what you're saying.
And if the Independent want to keep publishing, he's a very entertaining columnist. But he won't be getting in my head anytime soon. But I think he does get in some broadcasters' head.
He won't be downstairs on the stand.
No. Well, I asked him to, actually.
Did you?
Yeah, I asked him to go do the stand, but he says he lives in West Cork. I think he's a bit wary of me.
Okay. Fair enough. I want to ask you, it's funny we're talking about sources, the media, which is undergoing monumental changes at the moment. Obviously you've embraced the new podcasting, but I want to go back to your past. Father McNamee was a priest that was involved with Stellamare's football club, and you referred to in your book he was labelled as a monster, I think.
Yes,
or
he
you
was
said it somewhere else.
in the report.
In the report,
the Murphy report.
Yes,
Yvonne Murphy's. Yeah.
And I don't think you would have gone that far. So can you talk a little bit, I like what you're saying about distinctions.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that in the context of Father McNamee. Well,
in the context of, he was an abuser, and the Murphy inquiry into clerical sex abuse revealed pretty serious child sex abuse that he was involved in. Now, what I witnessed and what I endured was a mild, there's no such thing maybe as a mild form of that, but it was...
It wasn't as bad as other cases.
No. Now, if I'd have put in my book an exaggerated version of what happened to me, which would have been as simple as falling off a log, the book would have had more sales, more resonance, more value, and it would have been about something bigger than it was about. And I never considered doing that, but I have seen a lot of people do that, and as I'm sure you know, if you're familiar with media, you'll have seen lots of cases of people coming out about the sexual abuse they suffered. Now, for one thing, Father McNamee's dead, so he wasn't going to dispute it, but I wasn't going to do it because it wasn't what happened. So I erred on the side, if you like, of not hamming it up to something that it wasn't. It was a form of sexual abuse, but it was mild.
He basically did.
And I described it, and then I also put it in the context of the Murphy report, and said he may have done other things to other people, but this is what I experienced.
Yeah. And is there, does the media maybe fall down sometimes in going into detail with things like that?
I mean, some people, frankly, Fergus, you know, hype it up.
Yeah.
And say things were done to them that maybe weren't done to them in order to sell books and newspapers. It's a shocking thought.
You've seen that happening?
I have, definitely. It happens all the time. But I wasn't going to get into that.
No.
Because in the end, integrity means being able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, well, I don't give a fuck. I never did that. I wouldn't do that. And that goes back to what we were talking about when you're talking about being an analyst from a football show. You're doing it to the best of your ability to serve the public who are out there. And that's what public service broadcasting means. Telling the truth, number one.
We are told about how, or we hear about how the print media is dying, and there's more competition in, for example, RTE would have had a monopoly 50 years ago in Ireland.
Yes.
On TV and radio, and now there's more competitors coming in. It's a more precarious industry perhaps than it was,
Sure is.
but you have shown an ability that I genuinely greatly admire to adapt and to embrace this new form of podcasting.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that it's podcasting, but it's a new thing.
Yeah.
You've been around a while, but you're still able to jump into that all in. Do you know? So can you tell me about that transition for you?
Well, I mean, I'm a journalist at heart. I have all the characteristics of a journalist, which is that I'm no good at anything else, number one. And I'm interested in the news agenda. I have a genuine interest in politics, for example, in sport, of course. And I think that when I finished with RTE and I said, you know, do you want to sit there all day backing horses? And I said, no.
Playing tennis in Mount Pleasant or something?
Oh, no, not really. I'm not a very good tennis player. But basically, I wanted to do the thing, so I set it up. And I developed it. It's 3 years going now, and we have built up a very big audience. We have some great contributors, and we do what I would describe as long-form journalism. In other words, where someone like Sean O'Rourke, your dad, has to fit in maybe 7 or 8 items in his 2 hours, and maybe do 10 minutes on a story, a big story, or 15. We can do half an hour.
I get you.
So if Trump does something, Sean O'Rourke would have Mary McKeown for 10 minutes. I can have Niall Stanage, who's our guy in Washington, who's in the White House working, on for half an hour. So it can be more detailed.
Of course.
And then we can do our sports, and John and Liam contribute, and Didi Hammam to the soccer. That's very good. So people, I think radio, the competition for us is radio. And particularly people can get in their car, they can put the Bluetooth in, half an hour with the Stan podcast, and they get the full story of the Trump thing, or whatever is the story of the day, rather than, because they'll be in work when your dad shows on, so they won't hear it.
I get you.
So there's a whole new audience there that's on the move. People go to the gym and they listen to podcasts while they're in the gym.
Yeah.
So we have
On a
picked up.
plane, whatever the case, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We have loads of people in America, in all over the world, about 50 countries.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really amazing.
Speaking of Donald Trump, I personally think that there's a pretty one-dimensional coverage of him in Ireland, in England, and in half of America.
Yes.
And I've been exposed to the other half. Do you think we get, or do you accept that criticism of coverage of him, that it's very one-sided?
Yes, I do. Yeah, and we've endeavoured, I understand, to have a balanced contribution from Niall Stanage, who's no lefty or liberal. You know, he's a proper journalist.
And he's done his research.
Oh yeah, he works for The Hill, which is a paper in Washington. It's a very good paper. It is neither Democrat nor Republican.
Fair enough. You think he is enough?
Well, is he enough? I mean, I don't. The problem with Trump is this, that he clearly is an appalling human being. Look, this is the latest book about it. I've read 3 books about him. He clearly is a disaster waiting to happen. And the stories are, there. The problem is, for his critics, is the economy is booming. And unemployment is disappearing. More people than ever before are working. And he's delivered for the Republicans 2 Supreme Court seats. And there's a Supreme Court judge now who's in her 80s, or maybe in her 90s. And if she it ceases to be able to work, he's going to deliver a conservative, another Supreme Court judge, which is quite phenomenal. It means that Donald Trump, regardless of what venal character he is going to leave a legacy of quite enormous proportions. A conservative Supreme Court for the foreseeable future. This is absolutely astronomical. Now, what else he leaves, we don't know. But I think he's a very good chance of being re-elected.
I think so too.
Yeah, and in our coverage of him, we always make these points clear. And also that the Democrats have assembled a very poor field of candidates from whom someone will emerge to challenge Trump. But it's highly unlikely to work. So, I think our coverage is fair.
Fair enough.
But fair. Would I have a shock jock on, or someone? When I last worked for News Talk, they wanted me to take a shock jock who was doing the Hook show.
What's a shock jock?
American right wing, Rush Limbaugh type. And I said absolutely not. The Hook took him and he spewed out all this shit every, once a week or twice a week. I mean, that's what I wouldn't like to be on that list.
I get you.
Because I wasn't going there.
There are certain standards that you uphold that others mightn't.
Well, your father would uphold them, or most journalists would uphold them.
Okay.
But I don't think you'd have someone on every week
just for the sake
spout right-wing shit to get an audience.
I get you.
Yeah.
Is Ireland still a dump?
A kip is the
kip.
word I use. Yes, frankly. Although it's a kip that has some important redeeming features. The people are very nice, generally moderate, decent. There's a decency around that isn't in England, for example, or in America in many respects, or elsewhere. Yeah, I mean, our public services are disgraceful. Our hospital system is, and our education, the discrimination against poor people in education is dramatic and horrible, and education is so important. Distinctions, and we have a 3 or 4 tier health system, 3 or 4 tiers of health discrimination, which is appalling. I mean, I can get an appointment because I have private health insurance with a consultant in weeks.
Yeah.
Whereas other people have to wait years. That's not right. And in terms of housing, we just have, we have a tolerance for crooked people in white collar professions. The banks are untamed, walking all over us. The regulation of everything here, from banking to medicine, look at the cervical check scandals. This is really a frightening place if you don't have access to money and the best of things in education and health, which have to be bought.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a frightening country in that way.
So would Sinn Féin, I know you've been, well, just hear me out here, I think you've mentioned their integrity compared to others. Do you still believe in that with regard to Sinn Féin, or who's the best of the bad lot that is our...
Well, Sinn Féin want a border poll at the moment, which would be, lead to a civil war in Ireland. So anyone who calls for a border poll right now would be immediately, winner takes all, would immediately be consigning us to a permanent civil war with over 1 million loyalist unionist people who would not consent to be ruled from Dublin. Now, that's just madness. And they're back now to their reactionary worst. I mean, I was the most prominent critic of Sinn Féin and the IRA before you were born, and I was pretty unrelenting because I hate violence for political ends. So Sinn Féin are out of the equation.
So who's left?
Well, I don't really see that the political class. I mean, look at the people who are in it and look what they're doing. I mean, Darren Murphy, the Cork Fine Gael, the expensive stuff last week.
He went to Europe.
Yeah, but he was in Europe and he was claiming expenses from the door. He had another job in Europe on the QT. Or not on the QT,
Yeah.
actually.
I just think, Eamon, it's a pity because you talk about Donald Trump. I heard you just talking about Boris Johnson. They are not that they are the alternative in Ireland, but that's where it can lead to, those kind of figures.
Yes.
and that kind of toxic environment.
Yes.
I don't think Ireland is that bad, and I think that, I don't know, there can be a tendency to, I suppose, again, I'm sounding like the Martin O'Neill thing, but there can be a tendency to not berate, but to criticise without offering a real alternative.
Well, sometimes you can't offer a real alternative if it doesn't exist, Fergus. I mean, you said what's the alternative, or what's the best of the bad lot?
Yes.
There isn't the best.
So did you ever consider getting involved in that struggle?
I could have been in Dáil Éireann. Yeah. I didn't consider it for very long because I wouldn't be any good. I wouldn't have any power. I'd just be lobby fodder. Ask George Lee. Your father will tell you about poor old George, who I liked, and he's an outstanding journalist, as indeed is your father. George Lee went in and they didn't even talk to him. He won the by-election and he thought he was going to be able to, what do they say in America, shift the dial. He wasn't able to shift himself. So he left disillusioned, went back to RT with his tail between his legs. And I have great respect for George Lee and I like him. He's an outstanding journalist. So there's no alternative. The question is how long the Irish people will silently suffer from these terrible prejudice, this terrible prejudice culture, which is just so awful. Now, does that mean Ireland's a kip? It is, but you qualify that by saying it's a very pleasant place to live. There's no knife, like the knife crime you see in London now, 2 or 3 people dying most nights. That's not here. We don't have
mass shootings in America.
Yeah, and the racism, the wickedness. There's a couple of people trying to inject racism into our politics, but they've been slapped down pretty quickly, and pretty, ruthlessly, and hopefully that continues.
Many of my friends are regular users of cocaine.
Yeah.
And one of the focuses of your podcast has been the cocaine epidemic in Ireland. And I don't want to overstate your own dabbling in such substances, but and I would also point out, I'm sure other prominent people have just hit it better and are at it as well. Many people maybe in the establishment that you often talk about, I don't know, in journalism, all sorts of circles. It's all over Dublin, it's all over Ireland.
Yeah.
Was there a time in your life when you said, geez, I better take it easy here? Was there a turning point for you in your own habits?
Yeah, well, first of all, yeah. I mean, I was an irregular taker of cocaine in the early noughties, you know, when the Celtic Tiger was around and everyone was off their rocker. And I was working on a radio program called Last Word for Today FM, which was, we were working very hard, and once a month we'd go out because we were getting very good figures and it was doing really well and we were surviving. And I would dabble. Then I got a bit more regular than that. For a couple of years I was doing cocaine, maybe once a fortnight, which is once a fortnight too many. It was awful stuff. I actually fessed up. No one caught me taking cocaine. I said, look, I was taking this stuff, and I told a woman who was a journalist, and she published it. And what I said was, you can't get good cocaine in this town. It's dangerous. It's stuff, which it is. And she published it, and all hell broke loose. And when I was asked about it, I told them. I said, yeah, I've been doing this. Everyone was doing it, nearly, you know, in nightclubs and pubs, everywhere. It's much worse now. And I thought we should have public debate about it. Recreational drugs, cannabis, cocaine, ecstasy, and these things, to see if we could flesh out the extent of the problem, if we could in some way do something about it. And now it's, of course, it's much worse now. Do something would be decriminalising it.
You get rid of the gangsters.
Well, you either get the drug. You see, the mystique around drugs could be taken away if there was proper education in schools, in my view. If you sort of took the cocaine that's on the street and showed children in the classroom what it's consisting of, talcum powder, rat poison, anything, and you know, you either let gangsters sell that stuff, or you go to a doctor and get a prescription and go down to Grafton Street, knowing full well this stuff can kill you. Well, I don't think people would do it. I think now, it's not that easy, because it's like the climate change. The whole world has to embrace this thing about drugs in just the same way that they have to embrace the climate change. And they have to they've all got to jump at once. And that's not going to happen. That's not the way the world is. But speaking candidly and openly about recreational drugs, I found was a better thing than trying to hush it up and hide it, creep away in a corner and let the problem fester and fester. Because for middle class people like me, it's fine. But for people on the margins, it's heroin, cocaine, cannabis, because really a gateway drug, I suppose they call it. They destroy lives, and it's horrible. And again,
and they take some lives too, like prominent people in Ireland we heard of.
Yeah, well, Jerry Ryan, who was someone I had great fondness for and a high regard. He was an outstanding broadcaster. That was a moment when I said, I'm never doing that again.
Really?
Yeah, because his death was linked to cocaine use, and he had a heart attack. So I said, that's off the menu. I'm not going there.
There's a famous World Cup qualifier against Spain for the 1966 World Cup.
Yes.
That you were a part of. And I made a bit of a link in my own head. 53 years ago, or 54 years ago, because the match would have been before 66.
Yeah. 65.
65, so 54 and a half years ago probably. The Football Association of Ireland had a dishonest streak.
Yes.
And an incompetent streak.
Yes.
In it. That has now manifested itself again. I don't know, is it the same thing? Is it the same culture? But can you talk a little bit about that culture within? Is it Irish soccer? Is it Irish life? But specifically in reference to that match against Spain, that you suffered personally, and then what we see now with the FAI in absolute disarray?
Well, there's certainly, in soccer particularly, in Irish life in general, there is a nod and a wink culture, and there is a kind of a fondness, shall we say, for rogues, and for, it's true in politics, it's true in business, and in many ways it's a nice quality. We're not full of zealots and bigots, you know, but we could do a little bit more rigour in certain areas. The FAI sold out to Spain. The match should have been played in Highbury in London, in which case we'd have been favourites and might have won. But in return for receiving all the gate receipts, they took the match to Paris, where at that time hundreds of thousands of Spanish exiles from Franco were living. So there was a full house in Parc de France, and it was full of Spaniards. And they won. They beat us
1-0, wasn't it?
1-0, yeah. That was a sellout, a gross sellout, really, and they got away with it. And of course, the same breed of people were in the FAI all the way through. I mean, John Delaney's father, Joe Delaney, who's still alive, was involved in controversy before. He was the treasurer of the FAI before.
Really?
Yeah. So Joe would have seen things, John would have seen things, and the FAI was run, as I think a minister said yesterday, as a fiefdom. And Delaney took it, he took it to a new level, should we say. He took it to a new level altogether. There would be maybe 10 of them running it. He took it to a point where he was able to control every piece of the machinery, down to the point where he got a 3 million golden handcuffs deal. And only 2 guys had to be in the room, the honorary treasurer and the secretary. And they didn't tell the board. So really, only John and the 2 guys knew that if he stayed until 2021, which is only next year, he'd get 3 million. So there you go. That's Ireland.
Well, there's a tendency to say throw the hands up after the event. You had drinks on John Delaney's tab. So did you see it at the time?
Did I have drinks on his tab?
Well, you said that to a journalist on your he was buying rounds at some event or something.
No, what I did, I went to his bloody birthday party.
Yeah. So
because John Giles asked me to go to his birthday party.
So
yeah,
were you complicit? Were you as part of the Irish soccer establishment? Do you know what I mean?
No, I wasn't really. I'd done my service. I mean, I started out in journalism, hammering the FAI, and I hammered and hammered and hammered, and there was no hammer left in me. And then, don't forget, I was asked to go easy on Martin O'Neill, which was, you know, in another way, go easy on John Delaney, go easy on the FAI. So this is my bosses in RTI. I never went easy on John Delaney. I just wasn't in that branch of journalism anymore.
Okay.
I moved out to politics and other stuff, you know. So if I'd have been working as a soccer correspondent, I think I'd have been on his case a lot earlier.
Fair enough.
But I hold my hands up. I mean, I didn't suspect that he was as, you know, venal as he was at all. I couldn't. It's spectacular stuff. I couldn't imagine that he was that venal.
So what happens now in Irish soccer?
I don't know. I mean, as we talk at this moment, we don't know the extent of the problem in terms of debt, and no one can see a solution. There's 2 possibilities: liquidation, examinership, insolvency, with short of government support, and I don't think I'd support government support. I think looking after the kids and the grassroots boys and girls who are playing every week is important. But the rest of it, and also looking after
it'd be like a bailout.
Employees. Well, you can't bail out the people who are there at the moment who are still part of the Delaney empire.
Yeah.
And they're still there. So I don't think you can do that.
Okay. So you don't see any clear silver lining?
No, I don't. I don't see any clear sky at all.
Very last thing, I heard that you used to go to mass with your mum every day.
I did, yeah.
When you were younger.
I did.
And you described that as a positive experience, I believe.
Yes.
Do you mind me asking you now about your religious practices, if there are any, or beliefs, or any of that stuff?
Well, I still pray. I don't go to mass. I still pray. I still would consider myself to be a religious person, or sympathetic to religious people or to conservative people. And there are many, many hundreds of thousands of people in this country who, for whom their faith is very important to them and should be respected. They like to go. There's a church around there. I see very old people going every week, and they tend to be older people. But I think that's part of our culture. It's an important part of our culture. It should be respected, and their wishes and views should be respected. I think, of course, the church has done appalling things. But I've been in bed with journalists, with politicians rather, in doing appalling things. Appalling things are coming to light. But that is not...
that's not the whole thing.
That's not the whole picture.
No.
People they love to pray, they love to go to their church, to their mass, their confession, communion, take communion. All of that is very, very important, and I'm a very socially conservative person. Actually, I was against divorce, and I'm not mad about abortion except in extreme circumstances. So I'm not woke.
I get you. Well, I've heard one woman describe. I've heard one woman make the distinction between woke and awake.
Yeah.
And anyway, I think you've always been awake and aware,
yeah, and
watchful about the world around you, about the society you live in, and I think you've done a very good job.
Thank you very much.
Keep doing what you're doing. I'm sounding like a little sycophant
No,
here.
no,
thanks a minute.
A bit of sycophancy doesn't do me any harm these days. Thanks very much,
And you're giving me a cup of tea as well, so I can't complain.
Okay.
Thanks, Eamon.
It's a pleasure.